deep bottom. Gary Hughes. Graham Hughes. Grenville injects himself. The kick and chase situation. It's Gearan. Oh, he's taken on the full. It's a try, and it's a magnificent one. Oh, out of nothing, and that's the grand final. Glossop's gone 8th.
It's been called the greatest grand final try of all time. A magnificent moment of speed, daring and athleticism. It put the cherry on top of Canterbury's first premiership in 38 years and made their coach dance on the sideline. It was the first grand final of a new decade. A decade of excitement, brilliance, scandal, controversy and expansion. A decade that started with a big idea, ended with the best grand final ever, and a sexy grandmother singing the praises of the greatest game of all. It was the 1980s. Canterbury's triumph in the 1980 grand final, playing an open and exciting brand of football, had them dubbed the Entertainers. Steve Gearan's try was the epitome of that style, but their win was not the most significant game of the year.
Now there's a sight to see. Big Artie and the Maroon of Queensland and captain.
When Arthur Beetson led Queensland onto Lang Park on the night of July 8, 1980, nobody knew that the scheduled one-off interstate game would revolutionise rugby league.
It was always going to be a tough game. I know there was a lot of doubting Thomases. Rex Mossop said it would never work. Bobby Fulton said it would never work. Ray Warren said it would never work.
Interstate games had been played since league's inception in 1908. And in the 72 years previous, New South Wales had triumphed by the ratio of 3-1. The money and strength of the Sydney competition had lured all the best Queensland players to New South Wales. And to the chagrin of every Queenslander, their homegrown stars returned each year in a Blues jersey, usually to hand out a thrashing.
For so many years, we thought that we were a chance of beating New South Wales every year. That first game of every series, we used to think via the media that we were a chance of beating them. We used to be told that we were taking a game into that series that were some sort of hope. But you used to see Queensland with 10 or 15 minutes to go, leading the Blues. But at full time, we're always probably 20, 25 points behind, and you'd watch the crowd file out of the gates, and I mean, it used to be like a funeral.
The brainchild of QRL President and Labor Senator Ron McAuliffe, and supported by New South Wales Rugby League and ARL Chief Kevin Humphreys, the concept was greeted with scepticism from those who thought that teammates would go soft opposing each other. Those thoughts were quickly banished after the opening exchanges.
You know, Arthur was playing against a lot of his Parramatta teammates, and all of a sudden he was turning around and giving him a smack in the chops.
What had happened, Graham Wynn had hit our little halfback, Ollie, and of course I stepped in.
Tame by the standards of the day, it galvanised the 33,000-strong crowd who urged Queensland on to an upset 20-10 victory. New South Wales grumbled that they had been ambushed, but they had their chances.
Sides picked on Sunday night, played Tuesday night, back to Sydney on Wednesday, back to work and back to worrying about what's going to happen next week for your club side.
He might say, we weren't prepared and all that, and that's a lot of bull, you know. They were coming out. They came to play football. They came to win.
Unloads to Meninga. Nicely to Close. Close accelerates and does beautifully right through the gap.
Chris Close was a worthy man of the match, and Mal Meninga kicked 7 from 7.
We always seem to be underdogs all the time. I think that brings the best out in Queenslanders. And, you know, when you're underdogs and you've got that tag on you all the time, you always want to prove people wrong. And, you know, and the whole state gets behind you.
As had been the case in the previous year, in 1981 the concept was trialled again as the third game of the regular series. In what could be called the birth of the Queensland never say die spirit, the Maroons mounted a comeback from 15-0 down to win by 22 points to 15.
Scott, through! Still going! Up the middle of the field! Rose coming at him, Rogers coming at him! He's got him! Rose, a magnificent tackle! And I think it's a try!
The following year, the popularity of the games persuaded the authorities to embrace the concept, and all of the interstate series was played as state of origin.
When we started shooting our mouths off when it was 1982, we thought we're going to get all of our players back full-time. We're going to have the Queensland players on our team, you know, for 3 games. We've won the 80 series, the 81 series. What's it going to be like to have these players back for every game? And then, of course, 1982 started, and we were beaten in the first game. We thought we were in a bit of strife here. You know, we've shot our mouths off a little bit too early. We were in a little bit of pressure, under a bit of pressure, and in some danger. But thankfully, we knew that we had to provide a little bit of spirit on the field, and we had to show exactly what sort of character we had as a football team.
New South Wales won the first game 20-16, but Queensland came back to win the next 2. Game 3 is particularly infamous to New South Wales fans, as Queensland secured victory on the back of an in-goal bungle by Phil Duke and Phil Sigsworth.
Sigsworth feels it in the in-goal. Oh, he's taken beautifully and stopped it. He takes on McCabe, loses the ball with the try.
Arthur Beaton returned to the Origin stage as coach of the Maroons in 1983. With Wally Lewis beginning to stamp his authority on Origin football, Queensland took the series 2-1 to hand Artie his first series win as a coach. In 1984, New South Wales got serious about Origin and for the first time rested the selected team in the week prior to the games.
On it goes to Bostad, he's got a clear passage. Has he got the pace? Oh, he steps inside Jack and scores!
However, Queensland won the first game comfortably 29-12 on the back of Kerry Bosted's 3 tries. In the second game, 29,000 fans braved miserable conditions at the SCG, and as fireworks marking the start of the game thundered overhead, fireworks erupted on the field.
Dean Miles is looking to kick, but the New South Wales defence swarming in. That's already on. Punches being thrown from everybody. It's just close in there. Red Penny's involved as well on the ground as Brent to rescue. Ray Price, all training blows well. Jack Gibson, what an explosive start to this match.
After the passion subsided, a tight game of football ensued. In the atrocious conditions, scoring chances were few, and all opportunities had to be taken.
Last tackle for Queensland. Lewis, a little chip. Well, it bounces off the upright, and they're in! Dowling has gone in, and it's off a Lewis kick, and that's got to be luck.
It was a move we practiced all week where Wally would chip and it'd hit the goalpost and Greg Dowling would come through and catch it. And and there was something like 29,000 people there, and I thought, gee, Origin had arrived. I still thought there was a few doubting Thomases down here in New South Wales, but the New South Wales people had finally embraced it.
The Maroons won by 14 points to 2, wrapping up the series. The Queensland Origin wins had breathed new life into the Interstate Series, and the standard of football and closeness of the games saw Origin encroaching on Test football as the pinnacle of the game. In 1970, Great Britain lost only 1 game on their tour of Australia and New Zealand. Soundly beaten in the first Test against Australia, they won the second Test easily and scored 5 tries to 1 in the decider. It was to be the last time to date that the Poms would win the Ashes. Still, when the 1982 Kangaroo side to tour Great Britain and France was announced, questions were asked about the strength of the team.
The special people who were involved in writing about rugby league thought it was the weakest side they've ever sent away, but they didn't know because they were young. We had a lot of young guys, and we had some older guys like myself and Roddy Reddy who hadn't played that year, but we had blokes like Wally Lewis and Brett Kenny, Peter Sterling, Wayne Pearce, Harry Grath, all these guys no one ever heard of. They're all 20, 21, 19-year-olds, which ended up being superstars, particularly Wally. No one knew how good they were, and we didn't know how good they were.
Max Trilly, and a lovely ball. And just look at this drop forward, Craig Young goal. Beautifully dropped, and there's that man, Wayne Pearce. What a try.
I'd booked to go to Hawaii with the inter-season trip with the club, and on grand final night when they announced the side, Frank Stanton, who was the Kangaroos coach, was also the coach of the Tigers, and he came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, mate, I've got the team and you're in it. And it was just a surreal feeling, and I had to find somebody else to take my ticket to Hawaii, but that didn't mind. I didn't mind that at all.
Played at Hull in front of 32,500 people, the first test was a cakewalk, with Kenny, Growth and Meninga running rampant off the back of the strong and mobile forwards. The final score 40-4. The Poms were shocked by the fitness of the Australian side and thought the reason being their full-time professionalism.
Now, we were very much part-time players, but they thought we were full-time. So mentally and psychologically, they just were on the back foot from the word go.
Gal Green still going. They're going backwards. Oh! Well, that was a vicious kick from Les Boyd, number 10. There's no excuse whatsoever, and he's off. He's off, yes, and rightly so.
In the second test, the tensions that always simmered in Australia-Great Britain encounters exploded. But even with 12 men, the Kangaroos were more than a match for the Poms.
Oh, this is marvellous rugby. Wayne Pearce, Lewis, Brendel, Ray Price. Oh, this is unstoppable. The crowd are roaring, the crowd are cheering. Just look at that appreciation.
The third test was a tougher contest, and again tempers flared, leading to the referee taking unusual steps to quell the fighting.
There was a big sting zone just before half-time, and everyone was involved. The referee, Rascade, the French referee, called me over. Couldn't speak a word of English, but he and I got on very well. Called over Dave Topless, he was the Pommy. He was their captain. He called us over and he said, look, two guys to be sent off, Luke Crooks from the Pommy side and Les Boyd. He was really into it, blew it away heavy. Which, okay, so straight after half-time, they go back off for another 10 minutes.
Oh, and another break from this man, Wayne Pearce. He's got Kenny with, and can Krunic go in for his first try on this tour? He's got 15 yards to go. Yes!
The 32-8 victory made it 3-0 in the series, equalling the whitewash by the Kangaroos of the touring Great Britain side in 1979. The difference in ability and fitness that had become evident since 1970 was now a gulf, and the tourists went through the tour undefeated, earning the accolade the Invincibles.
I think that whether it was professionalism or it was just we had a very hard taskmaster in Frank Stanton, who then made us obviously very fit. If you don't know him, well, you'll say, geez, he's dirty. But he's not. He's getting the best out of you. He'd come up and pinch you on the boob like that. Pinch you, and he says, you can have a go there, you cat. You know, you have blood stream. That'd be half time. You got blood stream, then you got stitches over here, and there's no such thing as coming off the field. Broken shoulder, you're staying on. You got this, you're staying on. Staying on. It's simple as that.
The long slog of the tour was relieved by card playing and sightseeing, with Rod Reddy taking on the role of prankster to lighten the atmosphere.
It's non-stop. As soon as you wake up to the night to when you go to sleep, he's got something cooking, and it's just full on. At one stage there, I wasn't allowed to drink tea, and and the lady there who was serving us our breakfast every morning, when I first came here, I said, he's not allowed to drink tea. He goes ballistic, he goes off his face, has a fit or something. Anyway, the last day, I knew what was going on, so I used to drink coffee. I preferred drinking coffee anyway, so the last day I just fell straight backwards on the floor and collapsed, and they're pretending to give me mouth to mouth, and then she starts screaming, who gave him the tea, who gave him the tea? So I stood up and kissed her. An old dear.
And it's still going. Wayne Pearce, he's going for that line. Well, that was a magnificent try. So with 25 minutes gone, prop forward, Les Boyd.
The 1982 tour would be the last for fiery forward Les Boyd. No stranger to the judiciary at home, he became the focus of the clean-up campaign initiated by judiciary boss Jim Comins. It was Comins' mission to stamp out the thuggery that had long been a blight on the game.
It was a very brutal game. It was more or less like the law of the jungle. Only the tough survived, so to speak. And, if you didn't give a little bit back, you would have got picked on.
The impact of increased TV coverage meant that any incident of foul play was there to be replayed over and over again.
I had the misfortune to go down there once, or twice actually. The second time I got a warning, the first time I got a warning, the second time I got 4 weeks.
The judiciary under Comins began to hand out long suspensions. culminating in Boyd's suspension for 12 months for breaking Darryl Broman's jaw in a tackle in the first State of Origin game in 1983. When Boyd returned in 1984, he played just 3 matches before being suspended for 18 months.
You know, Liz has made him on, he didn't know when enough was enough. You know, I had a killing influence over Liz a number of over the years, but you know, even he was a raging bull out there. You know, when to pull the trigger, he didn't know when to stop pulling the trigger. You know, so which was a shame because he was a dynamo. He was a dynamo on the field. He just went a little bit too far most of the times.
Comans and the judiciary cleaned up the game on the field, but off the field, the administration of league was still run in the same ramshackle way as it always had been. But in April 1983, that was to change in a sudden and dramatic way.
I repeat, there will be a full open inquiry before a Supreme Court judge and jury.
On April 30th, 1983, the ABC Current Affairs program Four Corners aired a sensational report by Chris Masters, alleging pressure had been applied to the magistracy to influence the outcome of a 1977 fraud case involving New South Wales Rugby League and ARL President Kevin Humphreys. Within a week, a royal commission had been set up to investigate the claims. Neville Wran had stood aside as Premier, and Kevin Humphreys resigned both his positions.
I'd heard about this allegation that there was something wrong with the Humphreys case, and it was one of the many things that I heard, but it was one of the things that checked out. The more inquiries I made, the more it seemed like there really was a story in that, and after some months' work, the program ended on focusing on rugby league in particular and the nexus to the New South Wales magistracy.
Tom Bellew was elected president of the New South Wales Rugby League and Ken Arthurson appointed chairman of the ARL. They put in place the mechanism that would lead to sweeping changes in the administration of the game.
They called a public forum in which they asked various sections of the community to come and give their views, and out of it all, you know, we evolved plans for the future. And I think the best thing that ever happened in the game of rugby league was the appointment of what was an independent board to run the club.
Humphreys again stood trial on the original fraud charges, was found guilty, fined, and put on a 2-year good behaviour bond.
One thing I liked about Humphreys at the time was that when he was caught, he put his hand up and took his punishment, whereas you often see people just refuse to do that. They refuse to admit any fault or any guilt. So I do give him credit on that count.
He didn't take money from anyone. He paid every cent back, and he's a very highly principled and honourable person. And I think he was unfairly maligned in many instances.
In his first major story, it would make Chris Masters' name as one of the country's leading investigative journalists. The brother of then St George coach Roy Masters, he had followed league all his life, and he knew that the story could be damaging to his older sibling.
The night before it went to air, I rang him and I told him what was going to be in it. To his considerable credit, he put no pressure on me. He just listened to what I had to say. He must have known that it could be harmful to him. When the program went to air, he rang me afterwards and he told me how proud he was of me. So you know, I've got a great relationship with my brother. I'm very proud of him too.
Humphreys took no further part in the running of the game, and the scandal overshadowed his long career and contributions to league in Australia.
I think probably the thing that he should be most remembered for, he, along with the late Senator Ron McAuliffe, was responsible for the State of Origin series. It's probably one of the greatest games and achievements in rugby league, and Kevin Humphreys was very, very much responsible for that happening.
Coming on Victoria Road, and we actually got across Church Street, but from there on in we couldn't move. It was just, the place was full of people. We had to get a police escort into the club. The disco area was upstairs, and you could see the ceiling of the of the restaurant starting to bounce, and the people was chanting and stomping their feet, wanting to see the players. So they had to come down and call us up there, and went up the top and up into the auditorium. It's just a sea of people.
The raucous celebrations after Parramatta's first grand final win in 1981 culminated in the crowd burning the old Cumberland Oval grandstand to the ground. Like an offering to the football gods, it symbolised the end of years of frustration and defeat. Called on to speak to the jubilant crowd at Parramatta Leagues Club, coach Jack Gibson merely said, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." Parramatta and Manly entered the competition in 1947, and in contrast to the Sea Eagles' great success, the Eels had managed only 2 losing grand final appearances, the cruelest being the 1977 grand final replay thrashing by St George.
Robert Stone spin it away. The easiest of tries.
However, those years proved to be the building blocks of their period of greatest success, and under Gibson, the Eels became a formidable team.
Confident going into the game playing Newtown than I did if we had played Manly.
For the Eels, it was perceived that Newtown would not be their only opponent in the grand final. A feud with referee Greg Hartley had been festering for years.
Jack Gibson never worried me. Jack had a job to coach his football team, as I had a job to adjudicate over the laws of the game.
Came in and was very quiet and just pointed out a few areas where he thought we were down and where we'd have to pick up a little bit, and said to us, "Look, there's not much more I can do for you here. You know, you guys have got 40 minutes to do something about this game and the rest of your life to think about the result."
With Gibson
to half-time and scored. I mean, they defeated us in the second round of the competition, and they were a very good side, probably an underestimated side.
Well, this is a bone of contention. I never received an apology. I never heard about an apology, so I don't know where that story came from, because I was harassed by Parramatta supporters, not players, Parramatta supporters, for probably 10 years. And ironically enough, I can still walk around this city. I don't know how they recognise me now because I had hair, but you'll still see a Parramatta dude walk up and say, "You gave it to us back in '78 with a 7th tackle, and you did this and you did that." So there's still a lot of people out there hold a grudge against Greg Hartley.
Parramatta successfully defended their title the following 2 years, with Eric Groth's famous try getting them into the decider in 1983. Their opponent in both grand finals was their old foe Manly, and despite the Sea Eagles fielding top sides, the Eels won both games easily.
The Parramatta supporters regarded the 82 one as a more important and probably a bigger win because it was Manly. I think they felt we'd sort of come of age. We'd proven ourselves that we'd beaten one of the best sides in the competition.
The Eels had won 3 successive grand finals, and Brett Kenny had achieved the remarkable feat of scoring 2 tries in each.
Well, I would have scored 3 tries, and I actually knocked the ball on. The line was wide open. Steve Ella had the football in his hand. He was surrounded by players. I didn't think he was going to be able to get the ball away. Propped the ball up. I knocked on, line wide open, no one in front of me.
The 3 titles were a showcase for the potent attack of Kenny, Sterling, Ella, Groth and Cronin. But league was to change in the next few years, with the pendulum swinging back in the favour of defence. In 1984, Canterbury were coming up to their 50th year in the competition, and what better way to celebrate than to win the premiership. New coach Warren Ryan transformed the team known as the Entertainers into a relentless defensive machine, and it was this style of play that would prove.
They were very lucky, points for and against, to make it. They only registered 108% of points. Now, that for every 100 points, or every 108 points they scored, their opponent scored 100. So they were very entertaining, if you want to look at it that way. They lived by the skin of their teeth. So they might have done a lot of flamboyant things. I remember talking to Gary Hughes about it. He said there were a lot of hidings in all that flamboyance, you know.
Losing only 5 games in 1984, they faced the defending premiers Parramatta in the grand final. Under new coach John Money, the Eels had overcome a slow start to the season and had just scraped into the big one, after a late Eric Groth try sank the Dragons in the final.
Kenny dummies. Kenny pass. He does. He finds Groth. Groth goes for the corner. It's a try. Parramatta's got out a giant.
and he came up with a very defensive sort of pattern which you want to win games, and at the end of it, that's what they'll look back on. They'll look at Warren Ryan as a very successful football coach, whereas we probably like to be more of attacking side. But when you played against Canterbury, it was sort of like a war of attrition. At the end, you just wanted to be in front.
In 1985, Penrith made the semis for the first time in the club's history, surviving a midweek playoff game for 5th spot against Manly. However, the task of fronting up again a few days later was too big an ask, and they were smashed by the Eels 38-6. Balmain also had a great year, but the standout side was St George. The Dragons had made the finals in the previous 2 years, but in 1985, they had one of those years that harked back to the golden age of the 50s and 60s. They were minor premiers in all 3 grades, and each side made the grand final. Canterbury saw off the challenges of Balmain and Parramatta to face the Dragons in the decider.
That you come out to the 20-metre mark and take a tap and you retain possession. That's the reward for a successful defusing of a bomb, and it eventually came in. But we had to batter them into, bomb them into submission to actually get the rule to become, to be introduced.
Their nickname, but that didn't matter to one of their greatest entertainers.
You don't play grand finals to entertain the crowd. You play grand finals to win.
Here's Churchill on the run for Australia. Look at Churchill.
Rated by those who saw him play as the greatest ever, Clive Churchill's death in 1985 saddened the league world. Honoured along with Johnny Raper, Reg Gasnier and Bob Fulton as one of the game's immortals, the former South Sydney, New South Wales and Australian legend was farewelled by thousands, all paying tribute to the Little Master.
Both grandstands located on the eastern and western sides, almost overflowing. And
rising from the ashes of the old Cumberland Oval, Parramatta Stadium was christened by the Eels in round 2 of 1986 with a 36-6 thrashing of St George.
Steamrolling ahead, through Peter Ford, up to the quarter, picks up young Taylor. Taylor looks for support. He finds Mr. Perpetual Motion, Mr. Price. Well, won't he lap that try up?
It was the beginning of a dramatic slide by the Dragons as they failed to field a side in the finals, and to rub salt into the wounds, at the end of the year, their star centre Michael O'Connor defected to Manly.
No, Weathergrove's got the pace. He's wearing him down. He's not going to get him. Yes, but too late.
In a tight premiership race, Parramatta were minor premiers holding off Souths, Canterbury and Manly. In a playoff for 5th spot, Balmain beat Norths, with Scott Gale scoring one of the all-time great tries.
A sensational try. Probably the best individual try I've seen in rugby league television.
Manly and South's tilt at the title finished prematurely. Parramatta thrashed Canterbury, who in turn ended Balmain's run. For the second time in 3 years, it was the Bulldogs, Price and Mick Cronin. A serious eye injury had hampered Cronin all year, and he knew that the grand final would be his swan song.
I knew I was finished here. Look, those last few games, I didn't play that great, but the coach could see some value in me. I don't know what he saw, but yeah, so I saw out the year, and I've got to be thankful for John Money for that. Having been in all my years of travelling to Sydney, I reckon I was probably about 100 yards behind the accident, and I caught one of the people working on the tollway, and one of the road people, and I said, look, I shouldn't be here. And he sort of said, look, he said, follow me. He said, we'll get around the accident, just drove down the grass, we'll get around the accident. And he said, after there shouldn't be a car in front of you. And when I got there, I'd say there's realistically probably 20 vehicles had run into each other, back on the back of each other. But it's the first time ever the fog lasted all the way to the toll booth, actually, there at Heathcote. But having said that, I was probably arrived about the same time I usually do. I usually used to arrive about 40 minutes before the game. That didn't change on grand final day.
He then blew his whistle, and it was just, I think, more relief than anything.
But yeah, he's got some unusual philosophies on life, but you know, he's a friend and a great player.
It was good for Mick because of what he was able to do for me.
At the family club.
Well, I dropped the secretary's son-in-law. They subsequently became known as CEOs, Peter Moore's son-in-law, Chris Anderson, and that was a difficult thing to do, but it had to be done. And then that was the start of a terrible rift between myself and the CEO, because if there was one thing about Canterbury, the family came first. Football was second, very secondary to. I've seen the scorched earth policy when I was coach there, so that the results wouldn't, and I saw it happen to Phil Gould after me. The family definitely came first because he wanted to bring back his son-in-law as coach of the club, and it ultimately happened. I remember we all sat there one Saturday morning. There was a group of us, we called ourselves outsiders. We were the people they needed, but we were the people they didn't necessarily want if they were going to be successful, in my view. And Peter Tongue sat there and said that Chris Anderson will coach the side, Folks will be the conditioner, one of the girls will be the marketing manager, and everything that he said came true. Absolutely every prediction that he made, and that morning he had us in stitches. We were all having hamburgers after training, and everything came true. Absolutely everything. That club was there for the benefit of the family.
At the end of 1987, Ryan quit to take over at Balmain. Remarkable debuts in Origin history.
I worked out early that if I followed Brett Kenny around, there's a fair chance I'd come up with a try. And that's what I did that night, and kicked 5 from 5.
Game 2 at a rain-soaked SCG was a seesawing affair, with New South Wales having to withstand another Queensland fight back before Brett Kenny's late try sealed the win and the series. Steve Mortimer's emotion-filled celebration becoming one of the most famous images in modern football.
Turvey was an inspirational leader and very emotional. I remember when we arrived in Brisbane and he stopped the bus and he said, look, now we're in enemy territory, guys. We've got to stick together. They don't like us up here. Everyone hates us. People out there hate us. Look at them. They hate us. They're Queenslanders. The bus driver, he hates us.
The first series win was backed up by a clean sweep in 1986. But the following year, the Maroons were back on top. After losing the first game in the last minute, they won games 2 and 3 with a man-of-the-match performance from Alan Langer. Origin was well on its way to becoming the pinnacle of rep football, and Wally Lewis was becoming the most famous player the game had seen. Idolised in his native Queensland, he was reviled south of the border. Jeered at whenever he appeared on New South Wales soil, the absolute low point was when he was booed by the SCG crowd as he ran on as Australian captain to play Great Britain in 1984.
When I walked out as number 6, I got the loudest boo of the whole lot. I got an even louder boo than the English team, and I thought it was crazy. And then the crowd went into their normal chant of Wally's a wanker and Wally sucks from different ends of the ground, and I thought, well, this is it. My first game as Australian captain, and I'm getting this, Wally's a wanker and Wally sucks from different ends of the field. And I thought, here was a day that was supposed to be the proudest day of my life, and I was absolutely filthy. And I thought, well, I was absolutely furious, and I think I came out with a statement after that, and it was in one of the papers that somebody said, well, what do you think about Sydney? And I said, well, whenever you fly into the place, I said, I always like to sit on the left-hand side of the plane. I said, it's a lovely place. You get to see the Harbour Bridge and all of that looks fantastic. I said, it's a shame it's full of so many arseholes.
The tension and rivalry that had come to dominate Origin spilled over on the Australian tour of New Zealand. A rift developed between coach Terry Fernley and the Queensland-based players over team selections. Don Ferner replaced Fernley for the 1986 Kangaroo Tour of Great Britain and France, and the team led by Lewis and Peter Sterling emulated the success of the Invincibles by returning home undefeated. Prolific point scorer Michael O'Connor topping the tourists with 170 points.
We had Peter Sterling half-back, Wally Lewis 5'8". Yeah, Mal Meninga couldn't make the run on side. Gene Miles, Brett Kenny, Gary Belcher, Gary Jack. Just a fantastic backline, and that's why, let's face it, that's why I scored all those points.
Back home, the 1988 Origin series was another clean sweep to Queensland, with Game 2 having a sensational confrontation between Wally and referee Mick Stone.
Yeah, getting sin bin at Lang Park wasn't something that I expected at the time. It came after Greg Kinescu got the living daylights belted out of him. I ran in from about 20 metres away to try and give him some sort of assistance. The referee, Mick Stone, had the incident explained to them. The Queensland Rugby League touch judge said, I saw what happened, these players hit Kinescu, this is what happened, and the New South Wales touch judge said, oh no, I saw what happened, Kinescu started it and he started punching him, and then Lewis ran all the way in and started punching him. He said he actually instigated a further brawl, and I kept saying, and you can see it on the replay of the incident, I just kept saying, but he had the ball. But he had the ball. And I'm thinking, how the hell could he get up and he punched him and then he did this when he had the ball in one hand and Phil Daly was belting the life out of him? And he said, OK, well, he said to Greg Kinescu, you've got time in the sin bin and send him off. And then he turned around to me and he said, well, you ran in from 20 metres away to start another brawl and be involved. And I looked around and I said to Mick, something like, oh, Mick, you're kidding, fair dinkum. And I said, you're going to believe this bullshit. Oh, Mick, turn it up. And I walked off, and that's when, of course, all the cans started raining on the field. Anyway, I'd spoken to the ref about it a couple of times after, and Mick and I have had some giggles about it, and I think he's sort of agreed since the incident that there may have been one story from one touch judge that was slightly exaggerated, and Mick's always agreed on that point.
Despite several lucrative offers to move to the Sydney competition, Wally stayed put in Queensland. With the Broncos entering the competition in 1988, New South Wales fans had the chance to hate him on a weekly basis. But the increased exposure to the magic of his play that year earned a grudging respect from the New South Wales fans.
Yeah, there's been a lot of injuries in this great game. It's been played at an amazing pace, but here's Wally Lewis with a stolen ball now. Lewis makes his way upfield. He's got some pace. Lewis, can he go all the way? Still going, he does so. Wally Lewis has gone in, and look at this.
That famous try in Origin 2 1989, when Queensland overcame all odds to win the game and the series, finally saw Lewis receive the respect the champion was due.
I've got to say, from that moment, I can remember Queensland holding on. I said, lap this up. I said, never ever forget it, guys. I said, because you're never ever going to get this again. And the players all looked around, and I still remember it, and the New South Wales, the public, were all standing up, clapping Queensland off the field, because we did finish the game with virtually 11 blokes on the field. And I regard that as one of the proudest moments of my life. For what the New South Wales public afforded to the Queensland team.
In 1982, Newtown and Canterbury played the only 0-0 draw in first grade history. Played at Henson Park, the barren scoreline seemed to reflect the fortunes of one of the foundation clubs as it battled for survival. Newtown were not the only club that were in trouble. In 1983, Cronulla had to appoint an administrator. West lost their major sponsor, and players from both clubs had to accept half pay. In September of that year, the New South Wales Rugby League excluded Newtown and West from the 1984 competition. West took action through the courts and won, but there was no reprieve for Newtown. 2 years after nearly winning a premiership, they were gone, and first grade football was no longer played at one of the game's most famous and loved grounds. The changing nature of the inner suburbs of Sydney contributed to the demise of Newtown, but the plans to expand the competition were well in place by the time the famous club closed its doors. Canberra and Illawarra entered the competition in 1982, and though the Steelers would take 10 years to make their first final, Canberra lost a playoff for fifth in '84 and reached the big one in 1987.
Very, very talented, gifted footballer, Cliff Lyons. I really enjoyed playing outside of him.
We thoroughly deserved to be there. We got there. Our sort of birth, I suppose, as far as the club is concerned, with ensuing years where we had a lot of success.
Canberra's rapid rise gave many people the thought that when the star-studded Broncos entered the competition, success would be instant. It was. In their first game, they walloped premiers Manly 44-10.
If we didn't prove that we were a good team, we were in for floggings all season long. Wayne Bennett had put in an enormous training schedule for 3 months leading up to it, but I don't think, quite honestly, any of the Broncos players, myself included, expected to win the game by that margin.
We still had that 1987 grand final memory in the mind, and we were well and truly beaten up there. That was embarrassing.
The Broncos were joined that year by Newcastle and Gold Coast, with expansion seen as the key to combat AFL's encroachment into New South Wales and Queensland. Crowds were up, and TV had made the game more popular than ever. In an effort to kindle interest nationwide, an origin was planned for Melbourne, and Canterbury and Canberra played at the Wacker in Perth. However, the key to success lay in the marketing, and it was a brilliant and highly unlikely advertising campaign that did the trick.
Some boys has got the look of a Greek Adonis, and some boys just try to talk you off of your feet. Some boys think they're God's gift to woman, and some boys just think they're sweet enough to eat.
Attracting the fans to the game is one thing, but keeping them coming back led to the upgrading of facilities. The Sydney Football Stadium opened in 1988, and although the ground had its critics, it offered a splendid view for all.
Here's Hanley. Hanley's gone straight through. He's going to score on his own, and a well-deserved try to Ellery Hanley.
Balmain, under new coach Warren Ryan, had survived 6 sudden death matches to reach their first grand final since 1969. Boasting an international pack but a weak backline, Ryan bought well, with his star recruit, Englishman Ellery Hanley, providing the flair they needed.
You know, he was the English captain, and he was a player that was able to dominate a game and be a game breaker. And he won a lot of games for us in 1988, games that we probably shouldn't have won.
The Bulldogs had bounced back after the bitterness of the final Ryan years, and with ex-second grade coach Phil Gould at the helm, they had prospered. The gruelling and emotional surge to the grand final took its toll on the Tigers, and when Ellery Hanley was knocked out just before half-time, it was becoming evident that they would fall short.
Oh, there's no doubt it was high. There's no doubt it deserved harsher punishment, but that's bygone now. We can't turn that back. But if that tackle had happened now, the punishment would be pretty severe.
In the dying stages of the match, Steve Mortimer made his last appearance in a grand final, and the Bulldogs won 24-12. The 4 premierships equalled Parramatta's feats of the decade, and Phil Gould had begun his illustrious coaching career with the first up win.
A little kick ahead from Hagan. Might beat Conlon, but will it beat Nissan? That's going to be a try. And if there was ever any doubt about this grand final, you can forget it now.
Actually won about 9 straight just to even make the grand final that particular year. It was still, people doubted us. You know, people thought that, you know, oh, this is a team outside of Sydney. No team outside of Sydney's ever won.
In '89, we expected to win. We got into the grand final, we had the week's break, and we're up 12-2. And loitering on offside position around the ruck, and we deserved the penalty, but Bill Harrigan put his hand up and gave it to the Raiders. And to this day, I'm convinced that he put his arm up the wrong way. And he came up with some obscure ruling that he penalised Bruce for running not in the spirit of the game. Now, to me, I'd like to see if Bill's ever penalised anyone for that prior or after. And I just think he put his hand up the wrong way. And what happened was Canberra got possession and they actually scored from that next set. So that was a big turning point. It was a mistake. It was definitely a mistake because in a grand final, those guys would have pushed themselves. I see Warren's philosophy in bringing them off, putting a couple of defensive players on, but on the other side of the coin, Canberra really lifted once those guys came off because they're 2 internationals, 2 big fellas, 2 strike players. And there was no interchange then, so you couldn't bring them off, give them a rest and put them back on. Once they were off, they were off.
It's so easy for people when the result's in to say, oh, you didn't win because of that, you know, or you didn't win because of this. But very few people ever sit in the coach's chair and have to make a decision right on the second, right on the button, right on the minute. And you're basically trying to predict the future. They're talking about the past when they're giving their judgment. That's pretty easy because you've got the answer. It's like looking up the back of the book, getting the answer.
At half-time, we were down 12-2. We knew we were going to win it. And, you know, regardless of what Ryan did, or, you know, who got replaced and who didn't get replaced, and what instance, what decisions the referee made, we're always going to win that football game. That's the feeling that we had internally, and that's the way it panned out. In Sydney all the time, and the rest please yourself. You know, we were the first team outside of Sydney to win a premiership, and I guess the only way you gain respect is do it, and we went out and did it.
Rugby league had started the decade as a Sydney-centric game, facing an uncertain future. But through the tears and the turmoil, the triumphs and the tragedies, the game had become better run and more popular than ever. As the dawn of a new decade approached, it was left to the sexy grandmother to proclaim what league fans had come to believe.
Thanks to Rugby League, and thank you for a great audience. Thank you very, very much indeed.
This has been a Fox Sports production.